I didn't cry when my husband demanded we separate our finances to stop quote-unquote supporting me. I didn't ask why. I simply poured the rest of my coffee, looked him in the eye, and said, "I completely agree. Let's separate everything starting today." He smiled, thinking he had won a battle. He didn't realize he had just triggered an audit that would bankrupt his entire family. Have you ever been accused of something you were actually the one funding? Tell me your story in the comments. I'm reading every single one. My name is Olivia. I am 32 years old, and I work as a lead software architect. My monthly take-home pay is $16,000. My husband Ryan brings in exactly $6,500. For 3 years, I had been the invisible infrastructure keeping his family afloat. I was the silent investor in their version of family. Every Sunday dinner at our house meant I was footing a $400 grocery bill, so his mother, Cynthia, could eat premium steaks and drink imported wine. Every holiday meant funding extravagant gifts for his brother Jeremy and his sister Jessica, while I received generic $20 gift cards in return. I often asked myself why I tolerated it. The truth is, the trap of cruel normalization doesn't snap shut all at once. It tightens millimeter by millimeter. It starts with covering a dinner bill because you happen to make more money. Then it becomes covering the utility bills so your partner can pay off a small debt. Before you realize what has happened, your financial contributions are no longer seen as gifts or support. They become an expected baseline. You normalize the exploitation to keep the peace, convincing yourself that this is simply what marriage requires. You tell yourself that being the strong one is a virtue, completely ignoring the fact that you are being bled dry. My life consisted of high-stress deliverables, managing teams across 3 time zones, and solving complex architectural problems. I worked 60-hour weeks. Ryan worked 40, complaining constantly about his stress levels while spending his weekends golfing. I was subsidizing an opulent lifestyle for people who treated me like a convenience rather than a human being. They weren't shocked by what they'd been taking from me. They simply felt entitled to it. But his demand to separate our finances was the catalyst I needed. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. And the time for the final audit had officially arrived. The next evening, I treated our living room like a corporate boardroom. I printed out a document I titled the Master Ledger. It was a comprehensive line-by-line accounting of our household operations. When Ryan walked through the front air looking smug and self-satisfied, I handed him the folder. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke to him as I would a vendor whose contract was being renegotiated. "Here is your new financial reality," I said, pointing to the highlighted columns. "Since we are now operating as separate financial entities, we will split the household overhead exactly down the middle. Your half of the mortgage is $1,400. Your half of the utilities, groceries, and property taxes brings your total monthly operational cost to roughly $2,600. I have canceled the premium cable package and the weekly cleaning service, as I will now be handling only my own space and my own meals." Ryan scoffed, tossing the folder onto the table. "That is fine by me," he said, puffing out his chest. "I make plenty of money. I can handle my half." I watched the false confidence radiate from him. I wanted to see the exact moment the math actually registered in his brain. "You make $6,500 a month," I reminded him clinically. "After taxes, your take-home is closer to $4,800. You owe $1,200 a month on your truck. You have $800 in minimum payments on those 3 credit cards you maxed out. Add your new $2,600 household operational cost, and your mandatory monthly output is exactly $4,600. The color began to drain from his face. He stared at the spreadsheet, his eyes darting across the numbers. "That leaves you with $200 a month for gas, your golf memberships, and entertaining your mother," I stated, maintaining a perfectly level tone. There will be no more joint grocery runs. There will be no more dipping into my checking account to cover the shortfall. You demanded financial independence. Welcome to the free market. Instead of adjusting his spending or acknowledging his precarious reality, Ryan doubled down on his delusion. Over the next week, he turned to his echo chamber for validation. He spent his evenings on the phone with his coworker Richard and his mother Cynthia. I could hear their toxic conversations drifting from the guest room where he had relocated. Richard, a man on his second divorce, offered predictable advice. "She is just testing you," Richard told him loudly over speakerphone. "You have to stand your ground. You are the man of the house. Once she sees you taking control, she will come crawling back. She is probably just stressed from work." Ryan soaked up this terrible advice like a sponge, treating our financial separation as a game of chicken. He was determined to win. He began walking around the house with an inflated sense of authority, completely ignoring the fact that his bank account was hemorrhaging money. But the real catalyst for his rapid decline was Cynthia. Cynthia had grown accustomed to the weekly dinners, the expensive gifts, and the constant stream of subsidies I had quietly funded. When Ryan visited her that weekend, he didn't tell her about his newfound poverty. His pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, he maintained the illusion of wealth. Cynthia immediately took advantage, demanding he purchase an expensive new patio furniture set she had been eyeing. I watched the transaction history hit the one credit card we hadn't completely separated yet. He had put a $1,200 charge on it. He was actively destroying his own credit to keep up appearances for a mother who saw him as an endless resource. I simply removed my name as an authorized user, leaving him entirely responsible for the debt. He was convinced I would blink first. He was wrong. I was simply waiting for the final invoice to come due. My forensic audit of our marriage wasn't complete until I unraveled the full extent of his deception. While organizing my home office, I found an old bank statement shoved into the back of his desk drawer. It was an account under his name, one I had never seen before. I didn't hesitate. I logged into our shared family computer and navigated to his saved passwords. When the bank portal demanded a two-factor authentication code, I simply glanced at his phone, which he had carelessly left charging on the corner of the desk, and typed in the digits to bypass the security. What I found completely eradicated any lingering shred of sympathy I might have held. He hadn't demanded separate finances just to assert his independence. He had a specific, calculated motive. He had created a secret savings account. The account was nicknamed the Cabin Fund. For the past year, Ryan had been quietly siphoning money from his paychecks, penny pinching on joint expenses, and complaining about the cost of living, all to stockpile cash. And the ultimate goal of this covert operation, he was trying to buy a vacation cabin for Cynthia in the mountains. He wanted to present it to her for her 62nd birthday. He had planned to use my massive financial contributions to cover his actual living expenses while he played the role of the generous, wealthy son. It was a staggering level of betrayal. I had been funding our entire existence so he could build a monument to his ego and gift it to his ungrateful mother. But as I reviewed the transaction history of the Cabin Fund, a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. Just days before our financial separation, he had recklessly wired $14,000 as a non-refundable deposit to secure the property. That left him with only $1,000 as a safety net. Over the past 3 weeks, because his paycheck no longer covered his massive personal debts and his new household responsibilities, he had been forced to cannibalize what little remained of his mother's secret birthday present just to pay for his own groceries and electricity. The account, which had once held nearly $15,000, was now sitting at a pathetic $400. He was entirely out of capital, out of options, and out of time. Cynthia's 62nd birthday dinner was scheduled for this upcoming Saturday, and I was going to ensure it was an event none of them would ever forget. Saturday evening arrived with the precision of a scheduled demolition. Ryan had insisted on hosting Cynthia's 62nd birthday dinner at our house, desperate to maintain the facade of his success. He had originally boasted about hiring a high-end catering company to serve prime rib and seafood. But without my credit card on file, the catering company had demanded a non-refundable deposit, a deposit Ryan could no longer afford. I sat quietly in my home office as the guests arrived. I could hear Cynthia's loud, expectant voice echoing in the hallway, accompanied by Jeremy and Jessica. When I finally emerged and walked into the dining room, the scene was a masterpiece of pathetic desperation. Instead of catered prime rib, Ryan had panic-bought cheap frozen lasagna and bagged salad. The food was freezer-burned and barely heated through. Cynthia stared at her plate with an expression of profound disgust. "What is the meaning of this, Ryan?" Cynthia demanded. "I thought you ordered from the steakhouse." Ryan was sweating profusely, stuttering through a poorly constructed lie about a mix-up with the caterers. I watched him flail. The illusion of power from an empty wallet is a fascinating psychological phenomenon. People like Ryan build their entire identity on the performance of wealth and authority, using money as a prop to demand respect. But that position is incredibly fragile because it is rented, not owned. When the capital evaporates, the entire personality collapses. Without my money to rent his costume, Ryan was reduced to a terrified boy serving frozen dinners to a mother who only loved him conditionally. I walked to the head of the table and dropped a stack of printed papers directly next to Cynthia's plate. "I think I can explain the catering issue, Cynthia," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. Ryan couldn't afford the caterer because his secret cabin fund is completely empty. The room went dead silent. Ryan choked on his breath. "You see," I continued methodically, "Ryan has been secretly hoarding money for a year to buy you a mountain cabin for your birthday. He managed this by letting me pay for his entire life. But 3 weeks ago, he demanded financial independence. He dumped almost all of it into a non-refundable deposit just before I cut him off. Once he actually had to pay his own bills, he had to drain whatever was left of your cabin fund just to keep the lights on. Your son isn't a successful provider. He is completely, undeniably broke." Cynthia snatched the papers, her eyes scanning the dwindling balances. She looked at Ryan with absolute contempt. "You lied to me," she hissed. They weren't shocked by what they'd done. They were shocked that I'd stopped playing along. The echo chamber shattered. Ryan sat frozen in his chair, completely eviscerated, stripped of his money, his secret, and his mother's approval in one clinical strike. After Cynthia stormed out, followed closely by a disgusted Jeremy and Jessica, the house fell into a deafening silence. Ryan collapsed onto the living room floor, burying his face in his hands. He literally crawled to my feet, begging on his knees. He wept, apologizing frantically, promising that he would change, that he would give me full control of everything if I would just save him from ruin. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, no love. Just the cold, sterile reality of a concluded transaction. I told him I would take back control of the household finances to prevent the house from falling into foreclosure, but the terms of our marriage were permanently altered. He would deposit his entire paycheck into an account I managed, and he would be issued a strict weekly allowance. He agreed instantly, desperate for the safety of my competence. But he didn't realize that while I was fixing the spreadsheet, I was permanently closing the account on our relationship. Letting go of an illusionary marriage is a silent process. Society conditions us to believe that marriage is an unbreakable bond, a sacred vow that must be preserved at all costs. But love cannot survive in a parasite-host dynamic. When you realize that your partner views you not as a human being, but as a utility, the emotional connection dies instantly. Forgiveness isn't always a bridge back to the way things were. Sometimes it is simply the administrative process of untangling your assets before you walk away for good. The next morning, I opened a new secure account, completely isolated from his access. I initiated the transfer of my premarital assets and a trust fund from my late grandfather that I had purposefully never commingled with our joint finances. I seeded the account with $15,000 of legally untouchable money. It was my exit fund. I would stay just long enough to ensure my credit wasn't damaged by his incompetence, and then I would execute my final departure. I've come to realize that protecting your peace is the most critical investment you will ever make. We are often told that family requires endless sacrifice. But a relationship built on financial exploitation and emotional neglect is just a subscription to your own suffering. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. I learned to calculate my own worth, and in doing so, I realized his deficit was too great to ever repay. If you found this story powerful, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth about boundaries today.